Hello and welcome to the Quincy Access Television Studios. I'm Mark Crosby. Thank you for joining me for State View, a program that looks at various state issues and topics and helps you to stay informed. We are welcoming today Representative Tacky Chan. He is, of course, representing the 2nd Norfolk District in the state. And Tacky, I'm glad you came in today because you had just closed the legislative session last night, so the information we will talk about today is extremely timely. Thank you for coming in after a late night.
No, thank you for having me again, and we'll see how much you can remember when you go to bed at about 2:30 in the morning.
It was, what time did the session start?
Session started at, actually technically started at 11, but roll call started at 1 p.m. And then we closed session a little bit after 1 in the morning.
Well, as I had mentioned, I like the fact that you're at the Quincy Access Television Studios the day after, so that we can talk about everything that that happened last night, or at least the highlights. So talk about some of the legislation, that now has made it onto the governor's desk.
Sure, we've actually had some really important pieces that went through last night. The signature pieces, everyone's read in newspapers already, is regarding education reform. We changed the funding formula for the first time since 1990. We moved on to the governor's desk breakfast after the bell, which ensures low-income students to be able to get breakfast, hot food, hot lunches at schools. We moved on to the governor's desk a bill to change how we do election reform for campaign accounts. So we changed the way how legislators like myself will be reporting to the Office of Campaign and Political Finance about my campaign contributions and expenditures. And we were able to move very late at night, banning flavors for vaping devices and cigarettes, as well as put them similar to regulatory level as cigarettes.
And let's go back and talk a little bit more about the education funding. $1.5 billion over 7 years.
Yes, the Education Reform Bill is probably the most important piece of legislation I'm going to ever vote for. Even knowing if I'm around longer, I know this is going to be the most important one.
You're still young.
Don't let the hair fool you. But it's true. I mean, we haven't changed the funding form since 1990. It's a form that doesn't change, as you can tell, very often. In 1990, it was considered a signature piece because for the first time, the state was involved in helping cities and towns on education funding after Prop 2.5. For those in the audience a little bit younger, Prop 2.5 caps how much revenue the cities and towns can generate off of property taxes. So as a result, the state has increasingly stepped in over the years. As I've talked in past budgets, talk about budgets here in the past, about 40% of the budget, has been dedicated out to education, local aid, and you throw in the grants and everything else we do, it gets pretty expensive. So given the changing times and updated census and the changing socioeconomics, it was actually very important to change the funding formula again. And the projection right now is $1.5 billion over 7 years, but it can actually increase to $2.2 billion. And the reason for that is because as part of the bill, we have to look at the student populations. The 2020 census is coming, so everyone please fill out your 2020 census form because it will affect this funding formula and our projections for future birth rate. So the formula will be adjusted for that, and we increase our funding to things like special education, English language learners. We also put in more money to charter school reimbursement, and we actually now look at school employee health care benefits as part of the Chapter 70 funding formula to ensure that we address some of those administrative costs as well.
The reimbursement that you just spoke about, that's associated with the Massachusetts School Building Authority, correct?
Well, that one's for charter schools, which is
Okay.
different. Quincy doesn't have charter schools.
Correct.
So communities that do, there's actually a big deal on how we're going to reimburse those communities. But the school building assistance, we also increased the cap from $600 million to $800 million per year. So when the Treasurer's Office with the School Building Authority try to decide how to distribute funds, they're capped on how much they can spend annually. So by raising the cap by another $200 million, that will greatly expand a number of applications that can qualify for a single year.
Massachusetts is likely to become the first state to ban flavored tobacco.
Yes. As you probably heard, there's been a lot of advertising from advocates trying to reduce smoking. And the menthol and mint flavored cigarettes has a long history of targeting African American populations to get into smoking, and most of us all know smoking is a type of addiction. So this is actually quite a very new move to do so, addressing what frankly is decades practice of targeting a specific population. Vaping devices is also going to be banned flavors on it. And people don't realize that we've actually let the vaping industry kind of take care of itself in terms of self-regulation,
Right, no
market
regulation.
forces, and all that. And we didn't treat them like cigarettes because the argument is they're not cigarettes, even though they're nicotine devices. And nicotine's where your addiction comes from. And nicotine's not good for you. It's part of the cancer-causing agents here.
So how did they slide in?
Well, it was such a new device that none of us knew what we were looking at. One of the challenges being in the legislature is that as new technologies come up, they move so quickly. By the time we realize what it is, we have to figure out where it fits in our regulatory structure.
Okay.
And since vaping doesn't fit as a cigarette because you're not burning tobacco, what is it? And given the 40 deaths nationally and hundreds of reported cases of vaping-related medical issues, and 3 deaths in Massachusetts alone, which is quite a lot when you think about it, out of 40 nationally. And it was time that we really have to get a grasp on this. And some statistics have shown that up to 80% of high school kids have at least tried vaping once. And half of them are participating in somewhat regular use. And given the fact that it's advertised as a safe alternative to cigarettes with no scientific evidence, it is time to really bring out some better facts on a delivery mechanism. I tell people it liquefies nicotine into basically a water vapor. Last time I checked, you don't want water in your lungs. It's called drowning. And if you have a severe health condition, that can cause pneumonia. You're putting water into your lungs. And nicotine itself is an addictive substance. We've been promoting anti-smoking to try to stop an addiction.
And we should mention that Governor Baker has been proactive.
Yes, he did a 4-month ban on the vaping devices sales as soon as they discovered the number of injury and cases. The district court or the Superior Court's approved it. The industry's appealing to the next level. But the reality is by the time they finish the appeal, that 4-month period will be ending anyway. So, considered a health emergency by the governor's office to take such swift action. And one thing about vaping devices we learned from the Public Health Committee is the nicotine content in a vaping device is severely higher than cigarettes, up to 3 times. So, as a result, you're getting, for lack of a term, a bigger hit of nicotine for a smaller amount space using a mechanism that puts water into your lungs. Essentially, that's what's going on. So the idea it's safer kind of boggles my mind a little bit. And like I said, the studies, we haven't had full studies about this stuff. All the stuff is from the industry currently. But as we learn more and more about this over the years, it becomes more apparent that we have to treat these more like cigarettes.
And also included in the legislation is additional education.
Yes, we do treat these devices more like cigarettes. As a result, we're going to apply it into a similar excise tax funding formula. Because cigarettes have minimum pricing, vaping devices do not have minimum pricing. It's a little bit of an odd formula, but we're going to treat them the same. Part of the money is going to go into increased education about what vaping really is about.
We should mention that President Trump last I knew was backing off of a ban on vaping. I think he expressed interest at one point, but my understanding that he hasn't. I think he stepped back from that.
That's true. I've seen the same thing in the news, which is very disappointing because the CDC and the FDA are both heavily investigating what's causing these injuries and deaths. And they think the vitamin E component or some of the nicotine delivery mechanisms could be the cause, but it's not made it determinative. Same thing using marijuana through vaping devices could be the cause, but no one's been determinative. And this is kind of the challenge here is where people latch onto one fact, saying this is it. Well, it's a possibility. If you listen carefully how they talk, they don't say it's definitive yet. And the science behind this is still, as you can tell, rapidly being developed. I do have to give a mention that Senator John Keenan put enormous work into this bill. to address this important health and safety concern, as well as my colleague, Representative Danielle Gregoire. They have been really the leaders on this at the State House and worked very hard to get this information, understand it best. And actually, in John's case, when I talked to the senator, he actually has visited stores with vaping devices. And I'll let him tell those stories when you have him next. But his experience doesn't seem to reflect what the industry's been telling us. And that's very disappointing.
And it sounds like President Trump is caught between the industry and consumers.
I'm not sure where the president's caught between half the days, to be honest with you.
That's for another show, I suppose.
He says one thing, then 3 days later, it's not the same what he said before. And that's a whole different show.
It is. The approval of a ban on drivers using handheld devices.
This is something that's been on conversation for many years. We're one of the few states that really hasn't moved on some variation regarding texting and driving. Distracting driving is very dangerous. I'm sure everybody in the audience has seen someone text, talk, watch a video
Multiple times.
on
Yes.
driving on the windshield, which scares me. And as a result, unfortunately, there are fatalities associated with people being distracted. This does allow you to talk on the phone to using a Bluetooth device. Most new cars now have the audio function. I have one now, which is very helpful in terms of not being distracted, as well as the fact that if you're activating the Bluetooth device, that is going to be held against you. And right now, early on, we're going to do warning mechanisms. The cops can stop to warn you that this is a change, as well as a massive education program. This is going to be a change. Ultimately, later on, you're going to be fined $100 for using the device on the road if the police see you doing that. But ultimately, in the end, people always say, it doesn't happen to me, doesn't happen to me. But I always refer to it as like taking M&Ms out of a jar. You take one, no one notices. But eventually you take a few more, the jar starts to deplete, and the same thing happens here. I can do it for 5 seconds, then it becomes 10 seconds, and then the risk level goes up. And then, unfortunately, potentially, you could hurt yourself or harm others.
And we should mention that the initial fine, the first offense, is $100. It goes up from there to, I believe, $500.
Yes.
And then a surcharge on your insurance.
Yes, it's incremental for first 3 offenses. And then once you get past the higher offense number, then it'll be a surcharge on your insurance as an unsafe driver.
Let's tackle some other legislation. And I think I will let you, let's talk first about because there is some talk and confusion about this. The legislature failed to pass the closeout budget bill for the last fiscal year.
So we're in fiscal year 20 now. The fiscal year ends on June 30th of the year. So our fiscal cycle is basically
Correct.
July 1 to July 1. And fiscal year 19 was before July 1st. However, all our tax revenues, fees, fines, and everything else doesn't end on June 30th. We continue to collect previous fiscal years' revenue into next cycle, and we receive billing from FY19 into FY20. For accounting purposes, you cannot spend fiscal year 20 money on fiscal year 19 bills. It has to be spent in the same fiscal cycle. Otherwise,
That makes sense.
exactly, the accounting wouldn't work. So October 31st is when all our bills have arrived, all our revenues final determination would be concluded, and then we would pass what's called a supplemental budget to dispense of those FY19 funds, as well as the billing. So for example, snow and ice removal money, all contracts that have been approved, all collective bargaining contracts in government employees, that's all part of last cycle's billing, because those contracts didn't come to conclusion, let's say, June of 2019, even though it was very late in the fiscal cycle, it did complete in that fiscal cycle. So we have to pay starting that fiscal cycle, as well as extra funds are available. For example, the House put in $400 million of a surplus fund directly into the stabilization or rainy day fund, as people know it, to bring up to 3.2. Now I'm having trouble remembering because it was a late night. $3.2 billion, which is the highest level we've ever had in the rainy day fund to prepare for future recessions. But also, for example, in the Cape, they had the tornado this past fall, and they need $3 million of financial assistance to help with the completion of that cleanup. So it can be able to be helpful in one-time things. And in the House version, we included $6 million for more Chapter 90 money, for road and bridge work money, which we don't actually have to bond. We're going to give the city and towns straight cash this time. So what happened? All right, this is real procedural issues. We sent our version of the supplemental budget about almost 2 months ago now to the Senate. The Senate did a procedure, what's called releasing a bill in part. So they took a segment of the supplemental budget, drafted a brand new bill as their version, and kept the rest of the supplemental budget that we sent inside Senate Ways and Means. The bill was sent to the House, but because we've never debated that new bill they just generated, we cannot form a conference committee on it. We only can form a conference committee of the piece of the bill that's sitting in Senate Ways and Means. So as a result, it puts the House in a rather procedural quandary, because we can't re-debate the same issue twice unless you suspend the rules on debating the same issue twice. And there is no desire for the House to suspend those type of rules, because we shouldn't be able to debate the same issue twice. So as a result, eventually an agreement came between House and Senate leadership to release the remainder of the supplemental budget that's sitting in Senate Ways and Means. Unfortunately, at a very late hour at the close of session, and they formed an immediate conference committee between the two branches, and they were not able to conclude their work before the end of the evening on November 20th. As a result, the conference committee will continue to have to do the work, and we will have to readdress this issue when we get back in January.
I do want to turn now to legislation regarding Body Works. Talk about that. That is in your committee.
Yes, we did hold a hearing on Body Works. It was the last hearing we had at the end of October. And what it will basically do is that it will try to put all the other professions that is not massage therapy, such as Reiki, Qigong, and many others, into the Board of Massage Therapy. The Board of Massage Therapy would add another consumer advocate as well as a police officer as part of its board. The logic from Attorney General Heery as well as Senator Mark Matilli is that it's a way to stop human trafficking and prostitution. However, as our testimony went through today and getting other information, there's actually no evidence provided for it, and from the police. Now, not to say prostitution and human trafficking is not serious, but the conversation from law enforcement keeps rolling back to massage therapy, which is a licensed profession. And what we've also discovered is that the term Body Works is all-encompassing. So there's a minimum at least 200 types of modalities, which I can't say the word modality properly, but the types of body works associated with it. So, and they're all different. So there's more than one type of Reiki, there's different types of Qigong, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
And they're not have a national standard, nor do they have individual schools. So one of the challenges regarding this is that we want to license the profession. How do you would license one that has no conventional education requirement in any school? There's no national association. The education process is passed down generation to generation. So I'll give you a very simple example. My colleague Roddy Munn, who's Cambodian from Lowell, practices a type of Cambodian Qigong. That's very different from my colleague Donald Wong from Saugus, who's the rep there, who practices Chinese Qigong. So which Qigong are we talking about?
Okay.
And this stuff isn't learned at Boston University. Roddy's case, he's a third, fourth generation practicer from family down. And this is true ancient medicine. I mean, we're going like 2,000, 3,000 years in some cases. In Donald's case, he actually traveled to China to meet different Qigong practitioners who've been doing it their entire lives from childhood to learn from them how to do it. How do I license that? So the argument is, we'll make exemptions. Well, then how many exemptions we're talking about? Sadly, the Attorney
Could
General...
there be too many exemptions?
Well, exactly it. And how do I determine all these different types? And sadly, the Attorney General's office has given absolutely no thought to these individuals, nor done any research regarding what this is about. They're solely focused on an issue which is very serious. But as I did in the public hearing, if you focus on this issue, and you tell me that majority of stuff is actually in massage therapy parlors that are licensed, as well as unlicensed people who claim the massage therapy parlors, you'll name me which of these 200 individual groups of body works that you guys say is not valid. At the same time, though, 80% of all human trafficking has nothing to do with sex trafficking. It has to do with workers, sweatshops, all kinds of other types as well. I believe it. See, I'm tired today, so I believe it's 80% is the other one. I have to look up the Polaris group again. But the committee is having a hard time struggling. All the members trying to reconcile what the Attorney General's trying to attempt to do, versus people who've done absolutely nothing wrong, and trying to figure out how to license something that isn't massage, but jamming it all into massage therapy, who has no idea what to do about these 200 plus different types of professions.
Right. So that's a challenge.
Yeah, I have a fun committee. It's pretty complicated. I enjoy the work quite a bit as I'm getting my head around all this stuff.
Mm-hmm. What about the Act ensuring equitable representation in the Commonwealth?
You mean the one with the Patriot Ledger made it sound like I was getting my head kicked in?
Yes.
So, despite what the Patriot headline says, which probably some of you have seen, faces backlash. The reality, it wasn't a situation where pitchforks were coming at me, so to speak. But this is a bill I worked on in the previous cycle that we refined, addressing all the concerns of the opponents. So one of the things that I discovered over the course of many years advocating with different Asian communities, as well as now work with the Black Latino Caucus, is that these lump sums categories of Asian, Hispanic, African American, and so forth, doesn't truly affect our Commonwealth. As a result, a lot of our data is skewed. So for example, the incorrect myth that Asians are healthy is completely false. It's a popular myth that's promoted out there. But we, Chinese and Japanese in particular, have 8 times higher rate of diabetes. But the claim is because we eat rice and vegetables, it's good. Well, that's false too. But because it's lumped into larger data sets as a totality of 4 billion people, example, this gets lost in the conversation. Same thing with cervical cancer. Vietnamese women have extremely high rates of cervical cancer, but not other Asian ethnic groups. So as a result, when you lump them into Asian Americans, and Vietnamese is a very small part of our total population, they no longer there. As a result, how do I argue for advocacy? Because the response from agencies will be, no one complained, and we have no information, so therefore it doesn't exist. And this is extremely troubling. Cambodian Vietnamese communities, Laotian communities actually have a very low graduation rate from high school. But because you see 5 valedictorians at Quincy High School's graduation, the presumption is that we're all highly educated. I can tell you to the audience now, my SAT score was 1030. And by the way, this is the old SAT scores when the max was 1600.
Yeah.
So no, I was not brilliant by any stretch of the imagination. But you get lumped into this incorrect myth,
That's
or the model
dangerous.
minority myth.
Of
And that's
course.
exactly it. You start to lose people in the tracks. And working with agencies like Quincy Asian Resources, if you actually go to the youth program, you discover how many kids in our system have challenge of English. As a result, standardized testing like MCAS is a horrible way, because if your English language skills are still developing, completing a standardized test skews the scores. And as like, for example, the Ed Reform Bill tries to address this by increasing our resources to educators on getting more English language learners, developing more better practices, actually getting some studies done about what's going on in our school systems with the schools to help us better distribute funds and provide these services.
Again,
And this bill will help that.
exactly, another plus for that legislation. Talk about what is coming up in the next session. You and I were talking about something that had to do with the climate, and that was plastic bags that was actually proposed in the Senate.
Yes, the Senate proposed a plastic bag ban. If you've been in Boston, shopped anywhere, you're now paying 5 cents per bag. I'm not clear exactly where the Senate's going on this. It was a late night. They kind of popped it out really quick, so I've not had any time to look at it. It's the next day from a bill that I think showed up at 10 p.m. in the Senate. The House has had no proposal on this yet. We've not taken a position. I know the city of Quincy has, before the city council, a plastic ban proposal, a variation plastic ban proposal.
Correct.
There's about 100 communities or so that has some variation. It's non-standardized. Very much to the not smoking in bars and restaurants. You remember that?
I do.
That reached well past 150 plus-ish communities that had variations on the same idea. So eventually the state had to step in and create a standardized one for everyone. And at some point, we're going to have to address the plastic bag ban as more communities go in to ban or provide fees or whatever they do to create a standardization. I'm not sure yet. Like I said, it was a late night. I have not seen the Senate version. It is important for the House to do its research to see what all those communities are and figure out what would make sense as a standardized format.
And we should mention that the House put $1 billion into the Green Works program.
Yes, we put $1 billion in GreenWorks as well as global warming prevention initiatives. The city of Quincy has benefited in the past for all things avoiding global warming and climate change stuff for the last several years regarding planning design work for that. The GreenWorks initiative will push that agenda forward to the next level to provide more resources at the state and local level to address a changing world.
And just driving into work today, I heard talk about a commuter rail overhaul.
Yeah, well, the commuter rail is in tough shape, as well as the rest of the public transit system, which I hear a lot about from everybody.
I'm sure you do.
As you've seen, there's been derailments on the commuter rail, particularly in the North Shore. Either a track cracks in half or other types of aging infrastructure. Some are accidents, which is very sad. People crossing a track or try to get through the gates when the train's coming, and well, unfortunately bad things happen. But it's true. I mean, it is these old rail systems have existed back in the days when we moved granite through the city of Quincy, these right-of-ways. So this is a new proposal we've heard because it's separate from the governor's $18 billion transportation bond bill, which we're still scrutinizing in the moment. That addresses everything from the MBTA all the way down to roads and bridges, state and local. It's just all encompassing.
It's expansive.
It's expansive. And in the House supplemental budget, going back to that for a moment, we actually proposed $50 million pursuant to the governor's request directly to MBTA to address capital projects in the short term. So we are working in partnership with the governor to try to get as much resources as possible, but we are still scrutinizing it. So people ask me why. We actually have a state bond cap. People don't realize this. You talk about the federal debt cap, right? We actually have one as well. Ours is approximately it's now over 19 some odd billion dollars. That pays everything from your Chapter 90 money, assistance and local level, all the way to buying open space land for preservation purposes, as well as addressing, DCR roads. I know people have some issues with construction projects in Quincy, but that's part of the bond cap. Everything's got to fit under there. The governor's giving us $18 billion proposal. Even over 10 years, that's $1.8 billion to try to push through over a decade. And how do we fit that within this bond cap? The state borrows approximately $2 billion a year. So $1.8 billion against a $2 billion average bond year. That gives you $200 million for everything else. So we actually have to look at this transportation fund very carefully, because absorbing that much debt has an enormous impact on the state budget because we have to increase our debt service component, as well as has a potential adverse impact on other capital projects that are out there. Because it's not just transportation, it's environmental, it's state buildings, it's this very long list of other stuff. So we kind of have to proceed with some caution. We agree with this massive infrastructure need, but I think the issue the governor's kind of put the legislature in is that if you don't give me all this money, then you're not going to get new bridges. On the flip side, if we give more of this money, then we're now responsible for massive debt service. So either way, the legislature is trapped in this really odd position.
And you had mentioned that this commuter rail overhaul is not included.
Correct. That's going to be added separately, or the MBTA is going to have to include as part of its existing debt structure. And one of the MBTA budget problems is that somewhere between 25 and 30% of the MBTA's entire operating budget is paying off debt.
Well, I want to thank you for coming in. We are just moments away from closing this program. We will have to have you back on a different day to talk more once the session resumes.
Absolutely. We'll be back in session in January, and in the interim in December, I'll be continuing a conversation with my co-chair, Paul Feeney, in the Senate on moving out committee bills. Joint Route 10 is February 5th. Joint Route 10 is when bills have to be reported out of the committee. So this winter time in the holidays, there'll be continuing a conversation between me and my co-chair about what procedure we're going to be using regarding moving bills out, as well as more work on some other ones.
Once again, thank you for joining us here today at Quincy Access Television, and we'll see you in short order.
I'll be happy to be back.
Thanks, Tacky.